Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another special sutta study as part of the Therigatha festival. And this morning we have Ayya Soma with us, who will be sharing the verses of Isidasi, Theri, from the Therigatha. And if you'd like to follow along to one translation anyway, you can click the link in the live chat. And if you'd like to check out the other events happening during the Therigatha festival, which is online, you can also click the link in the live chat there for all of the different sessions happening around the world, actually. And good morning so far to Elaine, Gita, Ayya Vimalanyani. Good to see you, Venerable. Hello to Elaine, Jens, Gita, Alexandra, Melissa, as well as Suzanne and Kyle. And welcome as well to our viewers on Instagram Live and all of those watching but not typing in just yet. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma for this morning's sutta study.
All right, thank you, Bhante Sumana, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and in particular to Venerable Vimalanyani for spearheading this project of the Therigatha Festival. So we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're all here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So the sutta this morning was actually voluntold to me by Venerable Vimalanyani. She suggested it, and I picked it up. And since I'm translating the Therigatha, I'm really happy that I picked it up, because it's a very long sutta that I really needed really long poem that I really needed the motivation to to work on it with a deadline. So I will be reading from my literal translation, as in it's both literal in the way that I made it, but also literal in the way that be word by word. So it's the first draft of the translation. And I believe the link is Bhante Sujato's translation. Great. So then you can see, you can have a different sort of sense of also how different people will translate the same words, and especially this this poem can, have different ways to interpret the Pali. So we can begin, and I will read and then comment as we go. So the poem begins. In a town with the name of a flower, Pataliputta, the best place on earth, there are two virtuous bhikkhunis from the Sakyan clan. The first one is Isidasi, the second Bodhi, with perfect morality, delighting in practicing jhana, very learned, with defilements removed. After walking for alms, eating rice, and washing the bowl, comfortably seated alone, this was said. Venerable Isidasi is charming and has not aged one single bit. What fault did you see in the world that made you intent upon renunciation? So we see how the poem starts by introducing the protagonists of this poem. So Venerable Isidasi and her companion, Venerable Bodhi, so two bhikkhunis that seem to be sharing a lot of wholesome qualities of awakening together. So they're both, meditators. They're also very knowledgeable. They have right view. They have good knowledge of the Dhamma. And most importantly, they've done all the work that has to be done. So their defilements are removed. They're enlightened beings. And so after doing all their work as monastics, our job is to go on alms and allow people to make merit, to support the Sangha. So after, they came back from their job and they ate the alms that they were given, they washed their alms bowl, and then they started talking with one another. And it's interesting how Venerable Body, by the way, this actually paragraph is, I was doing a tiny little bit of scholarly research, so not my own research, but reading other scholars' research. And apparently these were actually fragments that were added later on by the compilers of the Therigatha. So I seem to understand that the original was more a conversation, the conversation between the two of them, and the compilers added a little bit of context to make it more storytelling. But anyway, it's interesting how the compilers then had this, started fundamentally the poem with this question, which is very human, I remember the first time that I actually saw Bhante Sutaso in Abhavana Society monastery. I was a layperson and I went there on retreat. And he was the first young monk I had ever seen. I had been to Buddhist monasteries before, but they were all, significantly older than me. So they looked like old sages that weren't very relatable. And I remember looking at Bhante Sutaso, who was clearly a young monk, and there was also actually two other young monks. I remember thinking, wow, what happened to these monks? Like, must have been really depressed. They're not that bad looking. They're not, unhealthy. Like, why on earth did they renounce everything? So it's funny how the unenlightened mind, very important to specify the un there, unenlightened mind will think, will go in that direction. Like, you seem to have everything going on for you. Why on earth would you renounce everything? And of course, this is not what Body is saying, because she's an enlightened bhikkhuni, so she knows better than that. But I think this is sort of put at the forefront just out of compassion. So then it will initiate a Dhamma talk on the behalf of Isidasi that can kind of shed light on the questions that very often we can have when we see practitioners that are so, seem from the outside that they're not experiencing any suffering at all. And they're having such a great time in samsara. Why would they go forth? And so here, she phrases it, in what fault did you see in the world? So what was the cause of your suffering that made you intent upon renunciation, given that you're so charming and you have not aged one single bit? Apparently that's a thing that a lot of people care about. I personally was very inspired by this Italian actress called Anna Magnani, who was an actress from the 60s. And at a certain point, someone asked her something about, her wrinkles, because she had very visible wrinkles and put no makeup at all. She could care less. And they were somewhat, giving her a hard time since she was an actress in the public sphere. And she said, well, it took me so long to, put together these wrinkles. Why would I even think about getting rid of them? Like, it's hard work to mature, to develop wisdom. And I remember watching this sort of clip of an interview when I was a young woman, not young anymore. And I was like, oh, that's great. I like Anna Magnani. And that's when I stopped wearing makeup. And the poem proceeds. When she was asked this question in confidence, so alone, the two of them together, the one skilled in teaching Dhamma, Isidasi, thus spoke. Bodhi, listen to the story of my going forth. In the excellent town of Ujjaniya, my father was a wealthy merchant with morality and restraint. I was the only daughter of his, dear, pleasant, and cherished. Then men from the most notable families came to Saketa to ask me in marriage. A wealthy merchant with many jewels, my father gave me as a daughter-in-law to one of them. So we have here a little bit of a glimpse, both on Venerable Isidasi as a bhikkhuni. So she is described as someone who is very skilled in giving Dhamma teachings, which is probably why, Venerable Bodhi asked her that question once again, out of compassion for all of us today, that we can learn from Venerable Isidasi. We see throughout the suttas, in fact, that even the Buddha actually does not give random Dhamma teachings, does not like go around preaching to people. He will only give Dhamma talks when someone comes up to them and asks a question. So when prompted, when one has that interest of learning the Dhamma. So in the same way, we see that Venerable Bodhi, even though she's fully enlightened and already understands how things are, out of compassion, she's leading by example. So then we understand that we should always set our minds to inquire about the Dhamma, not giving the Dhamma for granted, especially these days that you can find so much Dhamma everywhere. This channel, another channel, a million channels, suttas translated in every possible language. It's incredible, the abundance of Dhamma that there is, and how we take it for granted because it's so easily available. As opposed to back in the day when there were very few resources, you see how much striving there was actually in people, to listen. The preciousness was very much evident there because you could hear 3 verses and that was all you could hear in your entire life. You'd better make the most out of those 3 verses. So really actively cultivating the mind of wanting to listen to the Dhamma is very important. So that is, one quality of Venerable Isidasi as a monastic. But then we have an insight in her previous life within her life. So when she was a layperson, and also an insight in the life of ancient India. So we see that she comes from a wealthy family. Her father is a wealthy merchant who also has very well developed sila, so morality and restraint, very good qualities. And he cared about his daughter. So all of these seem like pretty good karmic conditions to be born in, aren't they? And then we have the glimpse of how back in the day marriages would come into being. So very rarely it was a love marriage, but rather it was a little bit more practical. So a bit of a contract. And actually it still happens to this day in, most of the world, I think. I think it's perhaps a Hollywood byproduct, the whole love marriage. But there was more of a sense of let's create a contract fundamentally between 2 people. That's what a marriage is. And let's make sure that all these things are in place. So it's for the welfare of the 2 people in communion. So since Isidasi was coming from a wealthy family, there were quite a few people that were interested in her. And the father then picked one of them, made his sort of best choice, or the best choice that he could make. So the poem proceeds with, morning and evening, I bowed to mother and father-in-law. I paid respect as instructed with my head at their feet. To any sister, brother, or attendant of my husband, if I would see any of those honorable people, I would anxiously give them a seat. I arranged well food, drink, and other edibles. I pleased, I gave, and offered anything that was needed. In other words, she was embodying the sort of perfect wife that, the qualities that the perfect spouse would have back in the time of the Buddha. But also, we can relate to it. Perhaps things have changed slightly, or not exactly the same, the expectations or the way that people live, either in India today, but also here in the United States, here in West Orange, New Jersey. So perhaps rather than the specifics of how she is dealing in particular with her husband and his extended family, I think what's very interesting here is the aspiration to be the perfect partner, which if we've been in relationships, perhaps we've had that sort of idealized version of ourselves that then we try so hard to put it in place. I would appear at the right time, coming close to the threshold of the house. After rinsing hand and feet, I would approach my husband and Anjali. With mirror, ointment box, brush, and a bow for the hair. Made all the necessary preparations, I embellished my own husband. It's very interesting to see. The few weeks ago, we were talking about gender roles, how we believe so much in the gender roles today and what, like a man or a woman are supposed to look like, or, especially in this country, in the United States, there are very clear ideas of what it means to be a man. It normally comes with not caring too much about what you're wearing, like getting the first stuff that sort of baggy pants and a t-shirt. But even if you go to Italy, that's completely not okay. It's really not proper. American menswear is really not classy. So you'll see actually men wearing more tight, pants, tight, very fitted shirts and t-shirts, really paying a lot of attention on matching the garments. You'll have actually, the more macho the men, the more their eyebrows will be plucked in Italy. That's a very interesting thing. They will actually pluck it. It's like very, very fine, thin eyebrows. So not very different, from what we see here, how her husband really cares about his appearance. And she's there, making sure that he, smells all good and nice and has some cute little bows in his hair. This reminds me of a scene from Beauty and the Beast, when the Beast goes through all the ointments and the bows. And that looks a little bit dorky. But anyway, so she does all of these things for her husband. And then she says, I myself arranged the boiled rice. I myself washed the bowl like a mother with her only son. In the same way, I looked after my husband. And it's very interesting how she specifies, I myself, prepared the food. I myself washed. And that's because I am assuming she's coming from a wealthy family. So that means she probably had servants in the house. Nonetheless, she would take care of all these chores for her husband as acts of love, as being, fulfilling the ideal of the perfect wife. Up to the level of being a mother rather than a companion. So I find it very interesting how she highlights, just like a mother with her only child, I'm taking care of my husband. Thus, in this way, I offered service, a faithful servant who has destroyed pride, humble, energetic, and virtuous. Yet the husband was angry. So we see the unexpected result to her, anyway. And she's like, I'm being so perfect. I'm doing everything that is expected from me and more. I'm basically a floor mat. He can do anything he wants with me. And why is he getting angry? I'm not seeing the correlation. And once again, perhaps the details are a little bit different, but we can, if we recollect our past relationships, I'm pretty sure that it's a very common experience to relate to a significant other in particular way, make certain actions be very, very much there for them. And they don't seem to love us more. What's wrong in this relationship? We're puzzled. But what is really beautiful, though, is that then she says, she highlights that she still has these wholesome qualities of mind. So she never gets angry at him. But she is developing in these sort of this situation of distress. She is still developing wholesome mind states of being humble, of being energetic, of being virtuous. Having destroyed pride, that's incredibly useful towards awakening. Give you a little glimpse of the future. To his mother and father, he said, so this is the husband, unquestionably, I will go. I won't stay in one house living together with Isidasi. And the parents replied, please, son, you did not say that. Isidasi is so wholly learned and wise. She's energetic and vigorous. What doesn't please you about her, oh son? I love how puzzled the parents are in all of this. They're like, she's perfect. Like, what is wrong with you? And, he has to admit that is true, that there is not really any problem. So he says, she does not cause me any harm, but I will not stay here enduring Isidasi. This is disagreeable to me. Enough. Unquestionably, I will go. So he doesn't care. He doesn't really want to give too many explanations. He's like, yeah, she's great. It's true, but I just can't tolerate her. So I'm out of here. Having heard his words, my father and mother-in-law asked me, what have you done wrong? Speak without any falsehood. And Isidasi says, I have not done anything wrong in any way. I caused no harm. I did not speak improperly. How is it possible that my husband hates me? They led me back to my father's house, displeased and overpowered by suffering. Protecting our son, we have lost the good fortune of having this beautiful woman. So it's so sweet because actually it's kind of like the parents were in a relationship with Isidasi. And they are heartbroken. This reminds me of my mom, actually, when my brother broke up with his girlfriend that my mother really liked. And she was the most upset out of all of the people involved. And there's a very similar pattern. But also very interesting because, when we are not involved with all our passions and sentiments, so we're in a third person perspective, then we're very objective, So we see the parents, both the parents of Isidasi and the parents of her husband seem to have really looked for the best, wished for the best for their children. Everything looked really great on Excel. Wealth is there, check. Good looks, check. Wholesome qualities, check. But then the result is not. You're like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, but wait, why is it -2? Makes no sense. So it's confusion arising. And so we see also the conflict in their parents in his parents of having to, on one hand, take the side of their son, but at the same time, having to lose what they call their good fortune of having Isidasi in their family. Seems like they liked Isidasi more than the son. Then my father gave me to another man coming from a wealthy family for half the dowry of the wife. I lived in the house for a month, then he rejected me. I waited on him like a slave, innocent, with perfect morality. So it's interesting because it doesn't say ever why this keeps happening. And once again, it really does convey, I think, on purpose, a kind of mystery factor of what goes wrong in our relationships, in our romantic relationships. That puzzlement. Everything looks great. Everything is perfect. I did everything that I could. What is going wrong? I don't know. And it's also interesting because since this new husband gave half the dowry, the father gave half the dowry of the wife, it seems like the husband was really interested in Isidasi to begin with. So the relationship starts, really with the right foot. Isidasi wants a husband. The husband wants Isidasi. But then he's like, actually, I changed my mind. It proceeds, my father then saw tamed man taming others, going about for alms. In other words, a monk. That sage will be my daughter's husband. Put down the rags and begging bowl. I love Isidasi's father because he's relentless. He's like, okay, these wealthy people did not work out. Probably, their morality is not as good as my daughter's, but this guy over here, he looks like he's got some good morality. He's pretty restrained. Great match. He's like the OkCupid, Match.com of ancient India. But after a fortnight, he told my father, give me back my rags, my begging bowl and cup. I want to go back to going around for alms again. He's like, all right, I'm out of here. I want to be a monk. Then my father, mother, and all my group of relatives asked him, what was not done here for you? Speak quickly and we'll be done for you. There's almost an implication that they're like, it's not only Isidasi that's going to take care for you, we're also going to take care for you. Like, just tell us what you need and stay here. When this was said, he replied, enough, I'm able to look after myself. I will not stay together with Isidasi, living together in one house. But it's also amusing how the father, once again, tries to lure the monk with sensual pleasures. So he's like, well, there is all these great things, food, drink, anything you need. We can even provide more. Just stay. But the monk is actually, no, I'm going awakening. That's the real deal. I assume actually the monk probably was a really good person, and he realized that even having the perfect wife actually was not fulfilling. So he decided to go further. He is lost and gone, and I all alone consider. After asking for permission, I shall go either to die or to go forth. So we see that Isidasi is experiencing rejection, experiencing depression, experiencing suffering. And she's contemplating two avenues. One, that it's pretty unwholesome, so fundamentally killing herself, or going forth. Very interesting. It's very important, though, to reflect that actually, whenever we sit down and not ignore suffering, but embrace suffering, look at it, investigate it, we're doing the work of the First Noble Truth. And then suffering, either leads to more desperation because we're like, wow, then this is a horrible state of existence right now. This is too much to bear. Or we have the great news. We embrace the great news that the Buddha gives us, which there is an end of suffering. It's incredible. He tells us the cause of suffering, the fact that there is an end of suffering, and most importantly, out of compassion, he tells us how to get out of suffering by practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. But until we actually start practicing in accordance with Dhamma, that can seem very abstract. We're like, oh yeah, well, the Buddha says that there is an end of suffering, but this end of suffering doesn't seem very relevant, tangible to my experience. It seems so far away, so distant, which is why it can lead us to the extreme desperation of killing ourselves, making an unwholesome action that then will lead us to even more suffering in future lives. So luckily, Isidasi picks the latter choice. So we see, then Ayya came traveling through the area. She was of my father's clan, upholder of the Vinaya, very learned, with perfect morality. Having seen her, we got up and prepared a seat for her. Sitting down at her feet, having paid respect, I offered her food. So it's beautiful because we see that the entire family actually seems to have faith in the triple gem. So they welcome Ayya. They offer all the requisites. And also, very importantly, Isidasi can recognize the incredible qualities that Ayya has. So perfect morality, very learned, an upholder of the Vinaya. So practicing actually the conduct, the precepts that the Buddha has laid out for us out of compassion. And that's incredibly inspiring for lay people. When I first went to a monastery, I was incredibly impressed by the conduct of monastics. I did not know what Buddhism was, but it's this international unspoken language. You just see how it naturally creates the conditions for wholesomeness. So it's very inspiring. But you also have to have the conditions of mind the right conditions of mind to be able to appreciate that as a layperson. And so we see that Isidasi does have that great karmic condition as a layperson to appreciate it. So put down food and drink and whatever is to be eaten. Having satisfied her, I said, Ayya, I desire the going forth. Put down food and drink and whatever is to be eaten. Then my father spoke thus. Here, my little child, go and live the Dhamma. With food and drink, you will be satiated in your second birth as a contemplative. Oh, so sweet. So we see once again that Isidasi is so impressed by Ayya that she asks her to become a monastic. She asks to be ordained by her. And the father is completely supportive of this. He doesn't have even an afterthought about it. He's like, oh, that's great. Yes. You will be satiated in your second birth as a contemplative. And it's beautiful because this one is an intentionally chosen rebirth. I also particularly like this verse because actually I tend to use that wording whenever I talk about my life as a layperson and like my previous life within this life. So when I saw this, I was like, oh, it's interesting because all the lives before, I feel like I haven't chosen them intentionally. I made obviously actions that led me to those births, but actually being born as a monastic is an intentional choice that we make within our lifetime. Deciding to become a contemplative, you actually state it, you make it, and you're creating those conditions. And it's so beautiful. In tears, I said to my father with my hands raised in Anjali, evil deeds have been done by me. I will wear away that karma. So we see that Isidasi has already an understanding of karma and that some work sort of needs to be done. And that she has that sense that things that have happened to her are not just random. She doesn't live in a chaotic world, but rather there is the idea that we can do something about it, that we can make actions that lead towards happiness. And her father seems to be on the same wavelength, because he replies, reach enlightenment and the highest Dhamma, attain Nibbana, that which can be realized by the foremost humans. I bowed down to mother and father and all my relatives, and after a week gone forth, I attained the 3 knowledges. So the father once again gives her the best wish of awakening. So I'm actually so impressed. I was amused before by the father, but I'm also very impressed by how caring he is and supportive of his daughter, which once again is a really good, incredible karmic condition. It is in the, ideal requirements of becoming a monastic to have the blessings of the approval rather than the blessing, the approval of our parents. And it seems that Isidasi did not have to struggle at all to get that approval. We have other stories in the suttas where, monks have to starve themselves close to death in order to get the approval. So it's not something that was taken for granted even back then. And we see how actually the wish of the father, gets realized very quickly by Isidasi, which means she had incredibly karmic conditions that after a week gone forth, she reaches levels of awakening. What, this made me think is that sometimes we tend to fixate so much on, our bad karmic conditions. But that's because we're trying to make certain things work in the way that we want, and we are so obstinate. So we see here, that up until becoming a monastic, she was really trying to be the perfect wife. She was really trying to, fit in society, really trying to fulfill whatever society had told her that she needed to fulfill. But she didn't have the right conditions in place for that to happen, for that worldly happiness. But as soon as she gave up sort of that pursuit of worldly happiness, what was somewhat impeding that? Perhaps all the wholesome qualities that she had nurtured in that state actually became incredibly useful and perfect, ideal for awakening. And when I encountered Buddhism, at a certain point, I realized I had actually nurtured a lot of different qualities of renunciation, for example, as a layperson, and in my choices as a layperson, that were leading me towards craziness as a layperson, because, you're trying to both go with the stream and against the stream at the same time. Very difficult. It's insane. But then when you're actually just going against the stream, it's difficult, yes, but those qualities that you've developed actually fit right in the puzzle. So a friend of mine recently actually shared this thought of this word of rejection is protection, which I quite liked, in the way that sometimes we think that we focus so much on the rejection, we focus so much on the things that we don't get, that we actually don't realize the benefit, the hidden benefit that is in the sort of rejection, which is actually protecting us from unwholesome choices, protecting us, for example, in the case of Isidasi, of being in a really, lame, mediocre marriage for years and years, an unloving marriage. Had he not abandoned her, he would have probably stayed there being a devout wife, yes, perhaps nurturing wholesome qualities, but then you die. And what's next? What is the purpose of all of that? And similarly to the second husband, and similarly to the other monk. So if we focus in that particular respect, then we're like, yes, she didn't get what she wanted. But is what we want actually what we need? So in a way, actually, the rejection was protection, because it protected her from the true, from, taking up worldly unfulfilling happiness and actually pursuing real happiness, which she's able to fulfill. And, actually, I've been putting a lot of thought about this particular subject of karma. It's so interesting, putting robes on as a female monastic. We can get very, well, first of all, people tell us very often that it's somewhat, our bad karma, that we don't have certain requisites, or we don't have this, or we don't have that, etc., etc. And everybody has it better than us if they have a different body and all of that. And there's, of course, some truth to that. But due to the nature of our organization, I had the privilege of meeting so many male monks. And at a certain point, all my ideas of how idyllic, their training was, or how idyllic their sort of living situations were, started eroding a little bit. I started seeing how unsatisfied they were in those perhaps lineages that were not accessible to me as training grounds. And how I thought, if only I had those karmic conditions, I would be awakened by now. And I'm meeting these people and talking to them. I'm like, well, they're not awakened either. And they seem pretty much full of suffering. So this thought at a certain point arose in me that, sometimes we get very focused once again on the exterior qualities of what we think this is good karma and bad karma. But in reality, the bad karma is not seeing how our situation is good, is beneficial for awakening, how we can make the most out of our situation, how we can practice, as Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi says, not regardless of the obstacles, not despite the obstacles, but that the actual obstacles are the path. That these are conditions for awakening, for cultivating the mind. And so the perspective changes, shifts. And we can see how we're empowered to stop thinking that, we are the victims. Like Isidasi is not the victim of all her husbands who have left, but actually she's empowered to make different choices, new choices that lead towards awakening. And she says, I saw my previous 7 lives, which this current birth is its fruit and result. Single-mindedly pay attention, and I will explain it to you. I love how she encourages Venerable Bodhi to pay attention with one pointed mind, so with a concentrated mind. So not being, like, oh, when is this poem gonna end? It's very long. But it's also very interesting how she says, I saw my previous lives, which this current birth is its fruit and result. So once again, saying that she has done actions in the past that have led to current results. That's undeniable. But she actually knows what they are because she has seen them for herself. So she's not going about assumption, but rather out of knowledge. So I would like to highlight this over and over again, because when we talk about bad karma, that person has bad karma or I have bad karma, normally as devout Buddhists, we actually go about it out of assumption because we're not awakened beings. So it's very dangerous to go about that way. It's important to understand that nothing is random, but it's very important not to assume that certain people are experiencing certain results due to whatever they did in the past, because we don't know. Once we know, we can say with true knowledge, with security, out of compassion, instead of out of discrimination, out of greed, hatred, and delusion. So don't judge others, as the Buddha says. He's the only one, him and people like him, so enlightened beings, are the only ones who can actually make these statements. Up until then, just understand that it's causality in action, but we should not proliferate, we should not create papancha. So the poem proceeds and talks about her previous lives. In a town in marshy lands, I was a goldsmith with abundant wealth, intoxicated with youth and pride. I had an affair with another's wife. Fallen away from there, I landed in Niraya hell, tormented for a long time. After that torment was over, I entered the belly of a female monkey. A week after I had been born, the leader monkey castrated me. That is the fruit of my karma, having gone with another's wife. So we see Isidasi in her previous life was a male, wealthy, so very good conditions, worldly conditions, yet pitfall. He was intoxicated with youth. He was intoxicated with his privilege of being, young and wealthy. And that led to making unhelpful actions, actually bad actions. So transgressing one of the 5 precepts. So he engaged in sexual misconduct. It's very important to highlight how if we don't protect our minds, what we think that is a good karmic result can actually lead to really unwholesome states of existence, because we can get very complacent, and think, oh yes, I am so great, I am so wonderful, I am here, I'm rich, I'm the best of the world, yes, I can take this, I can have that. Yeah, you can do it right now. But what are the consequences of your actions? Well, apparently not that great. Spending a lot of time in hell and in the animal realm, castrated, and then fallen away from there, having died in the Sindava forest, I entered the belly of a one-eyed lame goat. For 12 years, I went about as a castrated boy, unwell, covered with worms, having gone with another's wife. So he is in the animal realm this time around, and also physically ill. Fallen away from there, I was born the cow of a cattle merchant. A copper-colored calf, I was castrated after 12 months. Dragging the plow, I carried the cart, unclean and unwell, having gone with another's wife. So then he's reborn once again as a farm animal, unwell, so still with health problems, castrated, and with lots of work. So in other words, don't commit sexual misconduct. Not a good idea. Make sure that whatever sexual relationship you have with others is consensual. Doesn't matter the sex, doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the amount of people. What is important is that it's consensual. This is what the Buddha is highlighting here. If it's not consensual, it creates harm to others and then ultimately to yourself in having all these different rebirths. Fallen away from there, I was born in the house of a female street slave, neither an honored woman nor a man, having gone with another's wife. So this, we get to the controversial verse of this poem that I suspect it's because that's why Venerable Vimananyani gave me the assignment. As a little challenge. So challenge accepted. So actually I looked into this quite some time because probably, I'm not sure, can you see what Venerable Sujato translated it as?
The one you just read?
Yeah.
Having passed away from there, I was born a slave in the street, neither woman nor man, because of adultery with another's wife. Thank you.
So usually it's translated neither a woman nor a man. But the word that is translated as woman is mahila, which is only present. I spent quite a bit of time researching this, only present in this verse and in another passage in the Vinaya throughout the entire Pali Canon. So where does this word, how is this word translated as female? So apparently there's a Sanskrit word that is spelled exactly identical. That means female. So I assume that that's where the scholars sort of kind of researched it. And then it was like, okay, fair enough. Woman, nor a woman nor a man. But as we see throughout the poetry, the Therigatha, which is why I haven't finished it yet, there's actually a lot of odd spellings of words. There's a lot of different ways through which things can be said and spoken, or that they have been transcribed. And so a possible variation that I saw was actually, instead of mahila, was mahita, or maha, that is worthiness. Mahita means honored. And that's what actually made more sense to me, also given the context. That's mahita, or mahila, a contraction between maha, so the sense of worthiness, and mahita, and la to make it female. So not an honored woman nor a man, given, of course, with the correlation of the streets being born in a home of street slaves. So it's very difficult to be honored, to have those conditions of worthiness if you're born in that particular state. And, the reason why also this seems more likely to me is because neither one or a man is generally interpreted by many as it referring to the genitals of the person. So either a hermaphrodite or eunuch. I don't know how you say. I know eunuco, eunuch. Eunuch. Okay, that Dante Sumano said, or eunuco in Italian. But it just seems so not in line with Dhamma. The Buddha says over and over again that genitals do not define a human being. In the Vasetta Sutta, he's very clear about that. There is no distinction between human beings based on genitals. So then why would be, that the product of bad karma? Doesn't really convince me. But even if if the text said neither a woman nor a man, why are we assuming that actually has to do with being a hermaphrodite? Perhaps neither a woman or a man means that actually the person was that Isidasi was reborn as an animal without a human body. So I think that neither a woman or a man equals hermaphrodite or equals whatever it is, a non-gender binary person, or in the spectrum, or whatever kind of assumption people have, speaks more about our assumptions when we read the texts than the text itself. So my interpretation is neither an honored man nor an honored woman. It just seems more in line with Dhamma and more in line with what is written here. But I'll leave it for you all to reflect. And in any case, I would say, going back to what we were saying earlier, not to assume, not to infer, not to make statements just based on one little tiny obscure passage in the Pali Canon, that means that then everybody who does not have 100% female or male genitals then that is the product of their bad actions in the past. It's very harmful. What you should be worrying about is saying harmful things. That is bad karma. Let's remember always that bad karma is something that we do right now. It's a choice. So when in doubt, just shut up. Dead at 30 years old, I was born as a girl in a family of cart makers, wretched and poor, often falling into debt. Then a caravan leader, for the increase of his abundant wealth, dragged me from there wailing, severing me from my family. When he saw that I was 16 years old, a young woman, I was taken by his son named Giridasa. He had another wife, virtuous, with good qualities, glorious, enamored with her husband. I created resentment for them. So here we see that she enters a situation as a co-wife. That was somewhat relatively common in ancient India, but definitely not desirable. It's also the situation that the enlightened Kisagotami speaks about actually in her verses of how the state of being a co-wife is suffering, that it put her even against her mother. They were both co-wives for the same man. Pretty bad state of existence. And on top of that, Isidasi, in this situation, we see that creates separation between the previous wife and her husband. And the sutta then ends, this is the fruit of that action. They cast me off and left, setting me up as a slave, but that also has been ended by me. So here it seems like the implications, the implication of the previous actions of creating separation and discord have led to, her sort of series of relationships of unhelpful or not working too well relationships. But what is really actually important here, I think, in this sutta, how it's important is how female rebirth is actually never seen as bad karma. So dispelling one of those myths, one of those unenlightened myths that goes that is prevalent in Buddhist circles. It's once again has nothing to do with our genitals, but rather it has to do with the conditions that one is experiencing in their lives. And so we see that actually Isidasi had pretty good karmic conditions all along, except for that tiny little bit that actually, once she made the appropriate decisions, became actually incredibly useful for her because she attained awakening. And so once again, most importantly, it's what are we doing in this moment? Forget about the past, but what are we nurturing? What type of mind are we nurturing in every moment? We see that her blameless conduct, for example, throughout, never indulging in hatred towards her husband, even while being hated, has produced karma that leads to the end of karma. It's wholesome karma. She's been nurturing all these paramis that have led her towards awakening. So then in the end, she can, roar the lion's roar. All of this has been ended by me. I can put this burden down. It's all done. I'm an awakened being. Isn't that great? So on that note, we can end the sutta this morning, the poem.
Annamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami. So thank you, Ayya Soma, for sharing those words of Dhamma and that wonderful verse from Venerable Isidasi. And hello as well to some new friends joining in. Hello, Michael, Angela, Jasiv, Gianna, Jillian, Shui, Chandni, Melissa, Jill, Bino, and Unknown. And if there are any questions, feel free to type them in. We can address a couple. So far, though, lots of comments saying sadhu, 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 wonderful, truth, so true. Lots of joy. And Gita has a question, which you may have been answered either in what you were sharing or in the sutta. Saying, Ayya, could her circumstance be because of a past karma coming to maturity? That is Isidasi's experience of suffering.
Yeah. And I think Isidasi was pretty thorough in drawing the connections between cause and consequences. But once again, that's not an invitation to do it with our own life. I mean, we should just have the knowledge that everything is not random, but not assuming that we've done this or that in the past, because that actually creates obstructions in the mind to move forward.
And on Instagram, Yukili also says, thank you for the lesson. I've learned so much and relate to the story of Isidasi very much. And Michael asks, or he's wondering if this is a possible takeaway from the sutta, which is, I get the hand that I'm dealt with based on the past, but now I will do what I can do to make a more auspicious life in the future.
I think, yes, what you can, though, it means the Noble Eightfold Path, not what you can randomly, but actually we have the incredible gift of having the Dhamma with us. So I have a clear, actually, you as well, since you were not born Buddhist, you did not have the good karma of being born Buddhist, then the Dhamma is something that is somewhat recent to us in our lives. So we've lived a big chunk of life without the Dhamma. It was dreadful. I don't know about you, but it was horrible. Going about thinking that I was making actions for my welfare and the welfare of others, and actually just creating more and more suffering. Because it's a hit or miss, right? If we go on autopilot, actually, as Bhante Suttazo says, our autopilot works really well, leading us to hell. So we want to stop that autopilot and actually reprogram it in line with Dhamma. So not being too creative about it, but actually really developing the Noble Eightfold Path. Each one of them with sincerity and with strength, with vigor. And that, yes, will lead to the happiness of ourselves right now and in the future. So we don't have to worry about having to wait the next lifetime. We can see it right here, right now.
And Jill has a question that you also addressed, but if you'd like to share some more. If genitalia are not a discerning factor, why are females considered less able to attain awakening?
They're not. By who? I would say the question is, by who are they considered to have less chances to attain awakening? The answer is Mara. So you can check out Bhante Sudaso's Therigatha special on Bhikkhuni Soma, where I get my name from the Samyutta Nikaya and from the Therigatha. So he shared that sutta 2 days ago. So you can see it on our live stream, and you can see who actually says these things to women. It's never the Buddha. It's Mara. So whenever we hear those things, whether it's other women telling us, or men, or people in robes or without robes, doesn't matter who it is, but we should just go, I see you, Mara. Talk to my hand.
And Melissa says, very grateful for this teaching and really like how you revealed that rejection is protection. And that seems to be all the online comments and questions. Not sure if the in-person audience has anything they'd like to ask. So it seems like we can end this sutta study with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And you can join us tonight at 7:30 p.m. for Monk Chat, where if you have any lingering questions, general questions, you can ask them there to a panel of monastics here at MT Cloud. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day.